Shop the Sherwin-Williams July Summer Sale and get 30% off paints and stains July 18th through the 28th. With prices starting at $34.29, it's the perfect time to transform your space with color. Whether you're looking to revamp your interior or exterior, we have you covered with bold hues, soothing neutrals, and everything in between. Visit your neighborhood Sherwin-Williams store or shop the sale online. Delivery available on qualifying orders. Click the banner to learn more. Retail sales only. Some exclusions apply. See store for details.
Cheers, Rockets fans. Welcome to The Logger Line, an exclusive podcast from the home of the Rockets.
Whoa!
Sports Talk 790.
Rockets!
The Logger Line is proudly served to you by Carbox Clutch City Lager.
It is good! Oh, yeah?
Red Nation, get ready. Get ready. The Logger Line starts now.
Welcome aboard.
Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for checking out another new episode of The Logger Line, again served to you courtesy of Clutch City Lager of Carbach Brewing. I'm Ben Dubose, your host, editor of USA Today's Rockets Wire, and contributor to Sports Talk 790, official flagship radio station of your Houston Rockets. I'm joined by Paulo Alves, our co-host and producer out of Portugal. You can follow him on Twitter /X at Paulo Alves NBA, me at Ben Dubose. We're chatting in the early morning hours of Tuesday, July 30th, with the group phase of Olympic basketball well underway. Even though this is usually the dead period of the NBA calendar, it's actually not this year, at least not yet. Rockets just got done in Summer League. Reed Sheppard earned first-team honors all Summer League. We also had Tari Eason making his return from leg surgery out at the Drew League in LA. He dropped 45 points last weekend. It's extremely encouraging for a guy who, again, just 4 months removed from leg surgery, and the Rockets internally believe he could be one of the 2 or 3 most impactful players next season when it comes to winning if he is healthy. And so seeing him out on the court after missing most of last season due to injuries, it's a very welcome development. And now, of course, we have the Olympics where Dylan Brooks is starting for Team Canada, Jock Landale, Jack McVeigh playing key roles for Team Australia. Bottom line, there's a lot going on. I know in our last pod we promised something of a part 2 when it came to evaluating Summer League, but I think we can move quickly on that because the last 2 games of Summer League were fairly uneventful. Cam Whitmore sat out both, Reed Sheppard sat out one, and perhaps your biggest Summer League standout after those 2, Orlando Robinson, well, he's now on another roster. If you haven't heard, he was signed by the Kings. As we speculated on the last pod, I think the math was just always against the Rockets using another roster spot for a center-only player because when you consider what they already have invested there between Sengun, Steven Adams, Jock Landale, they also want to give Jabari Smith Jr. at least some occasional minutes there when the matchups are favorable. And so you look at the back end of the roster, you look at the two-way candidates specifically. I think Jack McVeigh, an accomplished 28-year-old professional who just won Finals MVP in Australia, he's highly likely to get one of your two-way slots. I mean, there's a reason, wink, wink, that he was willing to leave a professional setting to come over and most likely pick you over other NBA teams. And then my guess is the other 2 will go to some combination of Nate Williams, Jermaine Samuels, Nate Hinton, the 3 guys you had on two ways last year with more positional versatility. Nothing against Orlando Robinson, played very well as a big man at Summer League. It's just the positional math didn't add up here with the way the roster is currently constructed. Anyway, to close the loop on Summer League, and I'll note the Rockets finished 2-3. That record's a little misleading, in my opinion, because 2 of the 3 losses were without Cam. 1 was without Reed. The other you had both, but night 2 of a back-to-back, everybody looked dead leg throughout that game. When the roster was all there and when they were fresh, the team results were really good. And then as far as the individuals, I think my biggest takeaway, and we talked about a lot of this on the last pod, but we'll go through it quickly again. I just think it was fantastic to see Reed making such a clear impact without making a ton of threes. He was basically averaging 20 points, 5 assists, 5 rebounds, 3 steals per game, efficient in doing so, shot nearly 50% from the field. That's why he was on the All-Summer League first team. The only weaknesses I saw were, at least statistically, 3-point shooting, where he shot about 28% over those 4 games, and turnovers with an average of about 4.8 per game. I really don't see either of those as super alarming. I mean, the shooting, come on. We have an enormous amount of data that he's an elite generational shooting prospect. There's a reason why we said throughout the pre-draft process that the big question with Reed was whether he can provide value outside of floor spacing, because that's going to be there. Now, I guess you can say he missed some shots that he should make, but I think the bigger storyline with that is just the way teams were guarding him. Because Reed was basically the whole offense at Summer League in terms of shot creation and playmaking, teams are able to sort of stack resources against him in ways that they shouldn't be able to if he's playing alongside several competent NBA players the way he will with the Rockets. He'll get more open looks. He should have more juice to compete harder on the defensive end as well. And then as far as making those open looks, the shooting data is there. It's real. Please don't worry about that. It's just a matter of time, in my opinion, and playing alongside better players. And then as far as the turnovers, I do think some of that can be attributed to the same factors with how aggressively teams were defending him. But I think we also knew going in that this was going to be an extended process when it came to Reed becoming a full-blown point guard. Again, in college at Kentucky, he was basically a sixth-man scoring engine. He had some flashes as a playmaker, but to use the comp that we've thrown out a lot this summer, it's not like Fred VanVleet was a full-blown point guard at Wichita State. It was a transition for Fred as far as being the primary ball handler, primary facilitator at an NBA level, going up against bigger guys that took him months, really years, to get up to speed. And the same is probably going to be true with Reed as well. He does need to get better with his handle. Some of his passes need to be better. For example, we talked our last pod about him needing to throw some of them at a higher velocity, but we knew all of that going in. He's not going to be a starting level point guard right away, and that's fine. That's why you have Fred to run the show for the time being. That's why the model is for Reed to come off the bench. That's why this is a good fit for him. The point is that every other aspect of his game, or most other aspects of his game, those do appear to be NBA ready, and so by and large, thought it was a very encouraging summer league for Reed, and thus a good one for the Rockets as well, since he was obviously their most important player out in Las Vegas when you look at the roster and projecting it to the NBA team next season. Paolo, before we talk about the rotation as a whole and some of the other guys that are playing this summer, Olympics and beyond, is there anything else you want to add about Reed or the rest of the roster as we try to put a bow on Summer League?
Yeah, I think you made the correct point on we know the shooting with Reed's going to translate sooner or later. He was taking some tough shots. He was drawing all of the attention from the defense. And this is a theme for basically all of, I'll call it summer basketball. These games don't really matter, right? It's fun. It's for the fans to see, the prospects with the team coverage for the first time. Unless you are even if you were starting the Olympics, I don't think people are judging Jokic off of what happens. It's mostly, it is exactly an exhibition for all of these guys. And so it's cool to feel excited about it, but then you shouldn't be drawing any long-term conclusions about any of these guys based off of what you saw in Summer League, because truth is, how many of the guys that Houston has had so far that Houston has had go through Summer League thus far have had the concerns that were there in Summer League, the concerns that there were there when they actually came and played in the NBA. I mean, Taylor Green looked like a sharpshooter in Summer League, and he struggled with that. Alperen Sengun, if I remember correctly, was a rebounding god that got a lot of putbacks in, but didn't really flash too much in the post. And well, how did that turn out? Jabari Smith didn't shoot well, and he was a fine shooter last season, even though he struggled in the first year with his shooting. I think Tyrese is tough to. I think Tyrese struggled a lot with, if I'm not mistaken, struggled a lot with efficiency because of all the putbacks that he missed, and that was something that translated into his first year. But for the most part, it's not indicative of what these guys will be. It's just a fun thing for, to fill the void in what is a very long offseason in the NBA. So I just look forward to, even though I know we'll get into whatever minutes Reed gets to play when we get to the actual season.
Yeah, and to circle back to your point on the value or lack thereof of extrapolating Summer League into what's going to happen in real games this fall, not talking about the preseason, talking about the regular season when it starts at the end of October, I think Reed made as positive of a first impression as could reasonably be expected, but it's not a guarantee that he's going to be a rotation player when the season starts. And I'm not saying he won't be. It's absolutely possible. I think the Rockets would love for him to take the bull by the horns, if you will, and grab that job, the 9th or 10th man off the bench with a fantastic training camp with a great preseason. It's possible. I think we're all rooting for him, but it's not going to be easy. I don't even think Cam Whitmore, after having such a great year as a rookie relative to his draft slot, relative to his young age, is 100% guaranteed to have a rotation spot when you look at how deep this roster is. I said as much on the last pod, got a little bit of pushback on social media. I saw you said the same on social media, so I know we're in a little bit of alignment there. And I just want to explain why that is. While we're talking about Reed, we can be very positive about him long-term as a prospect, and we're seeing some encouraging signs. But in terms of what does it mean for imminent minutes at the NBA level, not necessarily a lot when you look at this particular roster. And I think the first thing I'll say about this rotation crunch and how Ime Udoka is going to handle it, keep in mind there's a reason why people said going into this offseason that the Rockets were primed for a consolidation trade, because there are so many young guys that need minutes, so many mouths to feed, so to speak, from a developmental perspective. You have some solid veterans as well. Now, the right deal wasn't there for the Rockets to go all in, so we've said that they can be patient, that they can take this into next season, the trade deadline, maybe even the 2025 offseason, when they could have a ton of cap space. We'll talk about that later in this pod as well. There is some flexibility, but in the interim, if they go that route, if they sort of push it back a little bit, which at this point they have, not making that 2-for-1, 3-for-1, 4-for-1 type consolidation move, then it's going to be pretty difficult for Ime Udoka to play all the guys that this organization would love to play for developmental purposes. And I want to do an exercise to illustrate this, because I think when you look at it, not just on paper, but think of it through the perspective that Rafael Stone and Ime Udoka will use when they're trying to sort this out organizationally, I think you'll see why it's so hard to play every guy that we would all love to see play. So we all know there's 240 minutes in every NBA game, 48 minutes per position. There's 5 positions. So I think we can all agree there are 8 roles that are guaranteed 100%, no matter what, assuming these guys are healthy, to be in the opening night rotation. Your 5 starters from last year: Fred, Jalen, Dylan, Jabari, and Sengun. Then off the bench, Amen Thompson and Tari Eason, the 2 guys that internally might be, the favorites within the entire organization in terms of long-term what they're able to do and how they impact winning. Not saying for sure that's the case, but I know that internally they are very, very high on those 2 guys. They believe they are already contributing to winning at a very high level, arguably more than anyone else. And then there's the backup center role. Most likely that's going to be Steven Adams. That's why you gave up a couple of second-round picks to get him at the deadline. I won't completely close the door to Jock Landale, who had a very strong finish to last season and is looking great for Team Australia in the Olympics. Could also be something of a timeshare arrangement where, with Steven Adams coming off of knee surgery, missing most of last season, maybe Steven doesn't play back-to-backs and Landale will pick up the slack for him on night 2 of a back-to-back, something like that. But the point is, you've got the clear top 7, and then you'll have about 15 minutes per game, in my opinion, regardless of whether it's Steven Adams or Jock Landale, of a more traditional center, someone that does the rim protection, the rebounding, the hard screens, the different types of bigs that Ime Udoka has talked about, and something of a contrast to Alperen Sengun, who obviously functions as your offensive hub, as a playmaker when he's on the court. So I think those 8 roles, 7 guys, and then most likely Steven Adams, let's call it 8 guys, small chance that this Jock Landale, those guys are all going to play. We can agree. So my challenge for people listening, and you can make it interactive. You can tweet me at Ben Dubose, Paolo at Paolo Alves NBA. Add up the minutes for those 8 guys. Tell me what that number is, and then you can subtract it from 240. When I did this exercise, even being as conservative as I possibly could, for example, limiting Fred VanVleet to 32 minutes, when we all know he's probably going to play 35 or 36 just because Ime Udoka is going to want to chase wins. I think last year they didn't want to play Fred as much as they did, but it's just too tempting to try and get everyone you can. When you're in the grind, it's a super competitive Western Conference. They want to make a playoff push, et cetera, et cetera. Even if you are super disciplined with your minutes, and I tried to be for purposes of this exercise, limit Fred and Jalen to 32, limit Jabari and Sengun to 30, maybe with a few more minutes at center for Steven Adams or Jabari Smith Jr. sliding up. As conservative as I could possibly be, I got to between 210 and 215 in terms of total minutes from those 8, which leaves 25 to 30. That's not much. And the reason I want to look at it in terms of those 8, you can make a case maybe to play some of those guys less. For example, I've seen some saying, Dylan Brooks, should he really play 30 minutes per game? Can you dial him back closer to 25, even 23, 24. Now, we should note he's looked very good for Team Canada. There is value to his veteran presence. But even if you do decrease Dylan's minutes more, I think the obvious beneficiaries would be Tari Eason and or Amen Thompson, other guys that are in that top 8. So that's why I look at the top 8. We can quibble over exactly how many minutes these guys play, but at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter if it's going to someone else in that top 8. So if you decrease Dylan a little bit, okay, well, the obvious overlap in his position with his role would be with Tari Eason and Amen Thompson. So you bump up those minutes at the expense of Dylan. Regardless, those 8, the most conservative I can be, I get to still at least 210 and probably closer to 215. So beyond those 8, in terms of filling out the rotation, anybody at spot 9, maybe spot 10 if Ime tries to attend deep, you're talking about splitting 25 or 30 minutes. And it can be very difficult. On paper, it's very easy to say, okay, divide those neatly between Reed Sheppard and Cam Whitmore, the 2 highest upside prospects, and call it a day. That's easier said than done, because with young players, you want these guys to have something of a runway. You don't want them to play 5 or 6 minutes in the first half, then not at all, or maybe just 2 minutes in the second half because you're trying to chase a win. Because when the sample is that small, young guys that are trying to establish their footing in the league, they're likely to press. If they have a mistake, it's likely to stick with them, especially because the temptation is going to be to take them out of the game because you were trying to win. Think back to last year. I think by Thanksgiving at the latest, the Rockets knew that Cam Whitmore, who was already tearing it up at the G League, and we should note that the G League season does not begin until about November 10th, so it's not necessarily that one of your young guys would immediately go to the G League. They'd still be on the bench, but the G League would become an option by mid-November if there's no spot within the rotation. I think by Thanksgiving, early December, when Cam Whitmore was tearing up the G League, the Rockets knew that Cam Whitmore, even as a rookie, had far more tools, far more upside than Reggie Bullock Jr. However, they stuck for the time being with Reggie Bullock in sort of that 10th man role because Reggie Bullock was much more secure in himself. And so for that type of role where, maybe he plays 6 minutes one half, nothing, or just 2 minutes the next, maybe one day he plays 18, 20 minutes if he starts off shooting well, makes a couple of threes, he's hot. Next day, maybe he plays just a couple of minutes if the shots aren't going in, or maybe it's a total DNP CD. It's much easier to use a veteran in that way than it is a young player. And so even though Cam was ready, the Rockets kept Cam in the G League and waited until there was a role with longer runway available, which happened after Tari Eason was lost at the start of January, basically for the year. That's when Cam Whitmore entered the rotation. He's basically a 20 minutes per game guy the rest of the season. You need a longer runway for your young players. Otherwise, it's probably better for them to play more minutes at the G League. And that may not be the solution for the full season. Injuries happen. There also may be a consolidation trade during the year. All of this may be temporary. All I'm saying is that at full health, the way the team is currently constructed, you've got 8 guys that are clearly going to play, 8 roles at least that are defined. I think it's not impossible to then have a 10-man rotation dividing the remaining 25 or 30 minutes evenly or close to that between Cam and Reed, but I think it would be really, really hard. I think you have to be really disciplined with minutes because it's just not worth it to have a guy that you are really trying to develop long-term playing just the Reggie Bullock role last year sparingly. You're much more likely to use a role like that for one of your veterans that you brought back from last season's team that did help you win games at times last season. Think Aaron Holiday, think Jeff Green, think Jae'Sean Tate, who did help you early in the year. Even Shaq McVay, who you're bringing over from Australia. Look, he's 28 years old. He's a proven professional. He just won Finals MVP. He can shoot the lights out. He's playing well at the Olympics. He's an option as well that should be ready to play relatively soon. Otherwise, you don't bring over a 28-year-old. One of those guys might make more sense for sort of those hybrid 10th, 11th men on your bench that are sort of in the rotation, but not entirely. And so because of that, I think the likeliest scenario is that whoever plays better out of preseason and training camp between Cam and Reed gets that 9th spot with a more consistent role, initially 18, 20 minutes per game. That 10th spot is more than likely to be a veteran. Also, if it's a veteran, you can sort of go back and forth. Maybe one night you want to go smaller, so it can be Aaron Holiday. Maybe the next night you want to go a little bit bigger, so it can be Jeff Green, something along those lines. But the point is, it's easier for the veteran player to take on that sort of hybrid, uncertain role because they are secure in who they are. There's no one trying to define them as players anymore. They know who they are. They're much more secure in comfortable in their own skin. So it's easier for them to sort of come in and, even if it's just for 4 or 5 minutes, be who they are. For a developing guy like Cam Whitmore, like Reed Sheppard, it's a lot more difficult. And so because of that, as currently constructed, if those top 8 stay in place, while not impossible, it would be difficult, in my opinion, not impossible, but difficult for the Rockets to play both Cam Whitmore and Reed Sheppard if everyone is healthy. I think the more likely scenario is you play one of those guys, whoever looks better. I know Cam has a year more of NBA experience, but they're basically the same identical age. I think the gap is just a couple of weeks in terms of when they were actually born, both a young 20 years old. And so because of that, one guy might not be playing initially. They might have a few games in the G League. Not going to say that for sure because obviously injuries can happen, trades can happen. But the point is there's one guy who, as currently constructed, I don't think will have a 100% defined role going into the year. It shouldn't be seen as an indictment. It shouldn't be seen as a problem. It's just the reality with the way the roster is currently constructed. Paolo, I saw your tweet. I think we're on the same wavelength on this. Where do you come in terms of projecting Cam and Reed and how the Rockets fill out their minutes beyond those top 8?
Yeah, I'll go, I think, a little bit more to the extreme. I don't think either of them plays to start the season.
That is a spicy take.
Because it's not just what you said, right? I think people looking at the last year's rotation, right? Fred was playing 40 minutes a night. I think expecting 32 is insanely optimistic. I think 36 is the rock bottom of what's going to happen now. If you go on the internet and you pick, and there's multiple tools for you to build basketball rotation, you can build it all neatly, and you can give them 30 minutes a night, whatever it is. It'll open up more space. That's not what's going to happen. Ime Udoka is going to rely on the guys that he trusts. He's going to try to win, not at all costs, even more at all costs than it was last season. And last season, during the Rockets' winning streak, we were running 7 deep. And what I mean by 7 deep is we were playing 7 guys more than 14 minutes a night. And the reason I'm setting the limit at 14 is because if you're playing less than 14 minutes a night, as a young player, I would rather you be in the G League. And this removes all of the clutter with Jason Tate random minutes, or someone fouled out, or someone was in foul trouble. Or there was, I don't know, you were subbed in for a possession or whatever but the end of the quarter for defense or whatever it was. And so I don't think you can count on less than 36 for Fred. I think relative to last year Tyrese averaged 22 minutes a game, unless he's still injured, which I hope he isn't. I would struggle to see him play less than 28. I think he plays 30 most of the season. He's just that kind of player. His impact is too big, and he is the exact type of guy that you sub in when the game is getting scrappy, right? And last season there were times where Taylor Green was subbed out earlier if he was having a bad game. Tyrese is the guy that's going to come in and play extra minutes and is going to fill the role of whoever's not playing well, because he plays well every single night, even if his shot's not falling. He contributes in so many different ways. So I think he's going to play 30. That's an 8-minute increase from last season. Sengun is obviously going to play 30. There's only going to be one backup center. It's going to be either Steven Adams or Jock Landale. And then you're not going to have Jabari Smith minutes at the 5 because you have pretty clearly Sengun and Steven Adams there. And so all of this to say, you have the center rotation locked in. You then have 48 minutes times 2, you have 96 minutes to spread between the 3 and the 4. Take into consideration that Dylan Brooks is at 3 in most lineups. So you're going to give 30 minutes to Jabari. You're going to give 30 minutes to Tyrese, and you're likely going to give close to 30 minutes to Dylan Brooks, which means you have 10, 12 minutes at the 3 remaining. I would guess that if you want to play Reed Sheppard, he's got to play at the 1, so Menthos is going to have to play his minutes at the 3, which by itself is, for his development, is kind of counterproductive, but I think they'll have to split them some way. And you're stuck in this kind of triangle where you can, if you want to play Reed, Aman's got to play the 3, so Cam can play. If you want to play Cam, then Aman has to play at the 1, so Reed can't play. So one of them's not going to play. And I think over a long enough stretch, you're eventually going to run into a situation where it's just not worth it to have them both there playing that little minutes. And so because of that, I think it's going to be really tough for them to play, consistent minutes. Does this mean that at the end of the season you won't be able to go into their basketball reference page and look at their average minutes and see, oh, they average 16 minutes a game or close to it? Now, that'll probably happen because, as you said, injuries happen, and they will absolutely happen. It never fails. It's the one thing in the NBA that never fails. Injuries will happen, the rotation will shift, and those guys will get an opportunity eventually. But I think if we start off with a clean bill of health, I don't think, if you were to bet on it, I don't think it's the majority outcome that they both don't play. I think any betting house would give you probably, I always struggle with the American system, but they'd give you odds of a third, like 33% chance that they both don't play. And I think that'd be a really good bet to take, because at least to start the season. Because after that, you also gotta take into consideration that in case of doubt, I think Ime Udoka will turn to veterans before he turns to young guys. And on this team, Aaron Holiday is probably ahead of the rotation of Reed, or in comparison to Reed, at least very, very early on, if the Rockets are chasing something. And I think a big part of the reason why it will be tough for them to earn the minutes is because in case of doubt, I think the first reaction will be and Rockets have two players who fit this profile perfectly in Amen and Tari, which is they have a lot of positional versatility. I think Tari can play anywhere from even the 2 to the 4. Amen Thompson from the 1 to, sometimes even the 5 if you want to run small enough, which means that it's really, and considering that they fit the profile of the type of player that Ime Udoka likes, it's really easy to have them soak up those minutes without messing too much with the lineups. Listen, Jalen is having a bad game, Tari, and you play 7 more minutes tonight, and it's a pretty seamless fit as far as how easy it is to manipulate the rotation, which means that I would guess that they both start off in the G League. I mean, maybe Cam doesn't start in the G League off the get-go because there's some value to be had on having him as an or if Jalen has just a really terrible game, maybe even if you play Tyrese more, you're not going to play Tyrese all 48 or Amen Thompson all 48, and he brings that scoring point, so he maybe have the role you'd give Reggie Bullock last season, right?
Yeah, maybe you can make the argument with Cam that because he's been there, done that, it's less important to his development, as opposed to Reed, who hasn't been there before and had 1 year in college coming off the bench. You don't want him to sit at the end of your bench and not play. So if he doesn't have a rotation role, I think the G League is a slam dunk for him just because he needs to be getting minutes somewhere, as opposed to Cam. Not saying it wouldn't help, but he's accomplished enough to where you could at least make the case that, hey, maybe there's not added benefit to having him play, so there's more out of just having him as an insurance policy. I think that's the distinction you're trying to make.
Yeah, for sure. So it's a bit, as I said, it's a bit of a hot take, but I think considering how the general public feels about it, I think it's more likely that people are giving it credit, that they both are the part of the staple rotation during the first week of the season. That's basically what I'm trying to get at. Just because, as I said, we've got a lot of guys that we can very easily scale their minutes up, and they both fit what Ime Udoka likes in a player more, in my opinion. Not saying that long term this is going to be a concern, not at all, but as they prioritize winning to an even higher degree than they did the last season, it's going to be tough.
Well, what I would remind folks is that this is a byproduct of the decision to sort of punt back the consolidation trade. I think a lot of people will hear that with two prospects that look very good at Summer League that everyone is excited about and say, well, why did the Rockets put themselves in this position? Well, this was the choice that they had to make organizationally in May and June. I mean, one of the cases for trading the number 3 overall pick was that it's really tough to have a core seven. There's so many mouths to feed. And I think the rationale for keeping it, well, number one, the Rockets really believe in Reed as a prospect. That's most important. But beyond that, look, the roster they have today is not guaranteed to be the one that they're going to have 6 months from now or a year from now or 2 years from now. Things are going to change. And that's before we factor in injuries and all the other things that happen over the grind of 6 months, an 82-game NBA regular season, and so on and so forth. So we knew this was going to be bumpy, but the Rockets said, look, we think the overall value is better in the case of Reed. Just keep the pick than whatever they could have traded it for. And they like Reed as a prospect in terms of the trade opportunities to do a 2-for-1, 3-for-1 this offseason, especially in combination with their knowledge of there being at least a path to financial cap room next summer. They didn't think it was worth it to push their chips in now. So they chose to sort of kick the can down the road. Well, in the very short term, this is the result. And so I don't think it's bad planning. I don't think that it's a situation where you should say, well, why did the Rockets put themselves in this position where they might not be able in the first half of next season to consistently offer a role to at least one of these two really talented young prospects that we're all so excited about? I just think that when you zoom out, you take the 30,000-foot view, look, we knew this offseason when they didn't trade the number 3 pick, when they didn't make a super splash move, things were going to be tight with this rotation. And again, it's not a guarantee. There is a world where both these guys are in the rotation. I think the Rockets will give everyone a shot in training camp. And if things are close, then yeah, I do think that in a season where they want to win, but they're certainly not expecting to win a championship or anything close, they'll give a tiebreaker, if you will, to one of the young guys with more upside. So not saying they can't win a role, one or both of those guys, just that it's going to be tougher than I think a lot of the initial exercises on Twitter when you go into one of those minutes filler websites that you were referencing, Paolo. It's going to be pretty tight. And so, again, don't want to rule any of them out, but I was a little surprised after our last pod that so many people, at least a few, reacted with horror at the idea that Cam might not be in the initial rotation. Just take a step back and look at this roster, look at the way it's set up. If there are no injuries, knock on wood, hopefully there won't be. If there aren't any trades between now and training camp, this is going to be tough. I envy Ime Udoka in a lot of ways. He's got a great job. The Rockets are set up well. I do not envy the decisions he's going to have to make in October as currently constructed, because there's going to be some hard conversations with guys who probably deserve minutes on most NBA teams, but might not be in a position to get them here based on how deep the roster is when you look at not just the starting lineup, but who can fill out a 9 or even 10-man rotation for the Rockets. There's going to be some very qualified guys that are in the 12, 13, 14 spots, assuming health, when the Rockets open the season in October. One guy who will not be in one of those uncertain spots is Alperen Sengun, a lock, assuming he's on the roster and healthy to be your starter, et cetera, the way he was last year. Nearly earned All-Star honors and finished third in most improved player voting, might have been even higher than that if not for getting hurt at the beginning of March and missing about the last 20 games of the season. That's what I want to talk about now, because we actually had an interview a few days ago that Sengun did with a Turkish journalist. If you search Alperen Sengun interview on Google or on Twitter/X, you should be able to find it. The interview was in Turkish, but there are English subtitles. He was asked about his off-season and, of course, healing from the injury. He says he's doing just fine. He's feeling fine. He's ready to go for training camp, all the usual off-season items. But they also asked him, of course, about his contract, because this is a year in which he could get a contract extension. Guys that are first-round picks in 2021 are eligible to get new deals this offseason, or you can wait until 2025 and they would be restricted free agents and try to lock them up then. Should be noted that whether Sengun and Jalen Green also eligible for extension, whether they get a deal this offseason or the Rockets wait until 2025 for purposes of preserving that aforementioned cap room, the new deal would not start until next season, 2025, 2026, no matter what. Even if a deal was agreed to this offseason, it would not come into effect until the year after that. And I think that's an important distinction that gets lost. If the Rockets choose to wait a year, know that Sengun is not losing a year's worth of pay at a max or near max level. It's just waiting a year until the deal is formally agreed to and signed. And so Sengun had some interesting comments. I'll get into that. But before we get into the specifics of what he said and the implications or lack thereof, one bit of context that I want to run by you, Paolo, and we can probably do it quickly. when you look at the landscape of 2021 extensions, 2021 draft guide extensions that have been handed out this offseason with Cade Cunningham, Evan Mobley, even guys like Scotty Barnes, Franz Wagner getting max deals, I think at this point, with Jalen Green, I understand there's still more he needs to prove for the Rockets to probably feel secure in going to a max level, given how uneven his first 3 years have been. The flashes have been there, but we know the issues with consistency. With Alperen Sengun, when you look at the market in terms of other extension-eligible guys and what they're getting, I think the ship has sailed on any chance of getting him to take a sub-max deal. I think Sengun and his representation can just point to other guys in his draft class and say, look what Alperen Sengun has done by comparison. This is a guy who was nearly at an all-star level already. It's just at this point a matter of whether the Rockets want to give that deal in 2024 or whether, especially because Sengun as a mid-first-round pick in 2021 has a low cap hole, similar to how the Philadelphia 76ers, they could have given Tyrese Maxey an extension last offseason. They delayed it a year so they could have him on their books at a lower cap figure before signing the extension, and that allowed them to have the financial wiggle room to sign Paul George and then give Tyrese Maxey his max deal on top of that. That could be an option for the Rockets with the potential cap room they have next summer. Fred VanVleet has a team option on the third and final year of his deal, so as long as that's in play, the Rockets do have a path to cap room that could make them more patient with Sengun. But in terms of the calculus of giving him a deal now or waiting for purposes of leveraging that potential space, I don't think there's really a negotiation anymore. I think by seeing how many max deals have been handed out and comparing the production of those guys to Sengun, I think at this point, Alperen Sengun is going to get a max deal. There's not really a negotiation. It's just about, the ball is in the Rockets' court, and do they want to give it this year or do they wait until 2025? That's my read of the landscape. Paolo, are you in agreement on that?
Yeah, I think it's pretty well established that, you're not gonna get an extension.
You're not gonna get a discount.
Yeah.
I
was on that. I think I don't, as you said, I don't think that changes the stance that they should wait until next year, anyways, because there's just no downside to doing so. But I don't know if you had a bunch you want to. Do you want me to jump into the interview?
Well, yeah. So the interview, I actually found it refreshing. I thought. And you can tell Sengun is very well versed on the situation he went into, not just the extension, which he said his agents were waiting to hear back from the Rockets. Again, I don't think there's much negotiating to be done. The ball is in their court. He's a max player given the market of the NBA and his 2021 peers. It's just up to the Rockets when they want to give him that deal. Do they want to guarantee it this offseason, or do they want to wait to give it in 2025 and keep him on the books at a lower cap hole, I believe about $16 million. And so Sengun talked about that. He talks about the landscape of restricted free agency in 2025, what that would look like. Rockets would have matching rights, so it would not be like an unrestricted scenario, which most people around the world are accustomed to when they hear a guy in the NBA is going to become a free agent. It's not like that. And I just thought that Sengun was very knowledgeable. He was very even-keeled. He did say that he wanted the contract this summer if possible. He said it would give him peace of mind. And some on social media used that to advance the agenda. Folks who would love for him, because let's just be real, their Sengun stands first, would love for him to get the recognition of being a max player. They would love to see him get the peace of mind of having his future for the next 4 or 5 years secure, that first really big payday, upwards of $200 million in total. And they latched on to that and tried to use it to advance their argument, which is that, well, you should just do it in 2024 because it gives him the peace of mind. And if he's your franchise player, or even if you think he just could be your franchise player, then it's worth it. My response to that is, really? Him saying that he wants a max deal is common sense. Tyrese Maxey wanted a max deal last summer as well. That's not news. Quite frankly, it's not just an NBA thing. It's 90% plus of any worker in a capitalist society. If you ask them, hey, if your company, your employer is able to give you more guaranteed money and more guaranteed years, would you want that? I would guess that 90% plus employees would say, yeah, I would want that. That's common sense. Everybody wants more peace of mind. Everybody wants more financial security. nearly any player in the NBA would want more guaranteed money, more years on his contract. That's common sense. We know that going in. That's baked into the thought process. In terms of the implications for the Rockets and whether the wait, in other words, asking Sengun to wait a year for that guarantee to put ink to paper, whether there could be any negative consequences for the organization, it comes down to whether Sengun would punish the organization. I know that sounds harsh, but this is the truth, in other areas. Like, for example, let's say he's not as good of a player because he's trying to not risk injury. Let's say he's not the same guy in the locker room. Let's say that, I don't know, he has a harsh relationship with Rafael Stone that could compromise their ability to, get future deals done with him or whatever. I have not heard any of that. I'm just saying, when we talk about, the potential pitfalls of asking a guy like that to wait a year, that's what they would be. When I heard that interview, I did not get that sense at all. I heard a guy who seemed very happy, who seemed very understanding of the current landscape. I mentioned Sengun finishing third in most improved player voting. Tyrese Maxey finished first. And that's a guy who just did the same exact thing in Philadelphia. So this whole notion that I've seen on social media of, this proves that Alperen Sengun wants the contract, so that's why you've got to do it. That's nonsense. That's baked in. Everybody would want the contract. Everybody would want the peace of mind, the financial security. That's common sense. What you're trying to do is balance the risk-reward equation. And if Sengun is willing to be a good soldier, if he's willing to be a team player and delay his guarantee a year for the sake of financial flexibility to build a better team around him, there is some benefit to Sengun as well. Does he want to win a title? Well, waiting a year can enable the Rockets to potentially put a better roster around him as well. If he's willing to do that without rocking the boat, without causing a fuss in the locker room and the organization, then clearly, as you said, Paolo, there's more benefits to waiting. There's not a lot of upside to doing the deal early. And when you look at Sengun's interview through that lens, to me, I found it encouraging, and I think it's even more likely that you wait. I didn't see a guy that was overly emotional. I didn't see a guy that was super nervous, that looked like a different player or person than the guy who's been beloved in the locker room at Toyota Center the last 3 years and all around the organization. I saw the same Alperen Sengun, comfortable in his own skin, happy, content. And so because of that, I think that tips the scales even more towards waiting a year and giving the team more options.
Yeah, listen, I may go on a little bit of a rant here because it triggers me so much. I'll preface what I'm about to say with, this is a Houston Rockets podcast.
Yes.
Me and Ben are Houston Rockets fans, which means I do not give a flying, you know what I'm going to say next, about the financial well-being of whoever the player is. Sengun or no Sengun, if I could sign the entire roster to minimum deals, I would. Because what matters is the flexibility of the team moving forward, because I support the team, not any of its individual components. That be Jalen, one of my admittedly favorite guys, Tari Eason, or whoever it is, Sengun included. I don't care about the validation or trust or privilege or recognition of a max extension and whatever that means. So that component of it has zero merit from my point of view. And Twitter is full of people talking about this. I don't care. I don't care what the outside public thinks the Rockets think about Sengun. Which is why in any Rafael Stone presser, radio interview, whatever, I'm not paying attention to what he's saying or to the exact words he's saying about Sengun or Keelan Green. This was like a 2 or 3 weeks ago thing during the post-draft radio interview or whatever, where he said some things about Sengun and Jalen, and people were like jealous that Sengun didn't get the same compliment Jalen got.
Oh, that was
insane. Just insane stuff. Listen, so taking that into consideration, absolutely no reason, unless Sengun issues an ultimatum, and even then, to max extend him this season when you can do it next off season and have all of the flexibility that comes along with a smaller cap hold of the guy that was picked 16th, which is not the same thing that happens with Jalen Green, which is why, if you go back and listen to the pods we did throughout the season, I've always said that Sengun was not going to get extended, and sometimes we can admit it. Sometimes there's some rumors and some information that people share amongst content creators that kind of gives us a good guess of what's going to happen. Nobody knew, but logic dictated that it made no sense for the Rockets to outright max a guy unless he's a bona fide all-star and you are terrified of hurting whatever relationship it is. There was no incentive to doing so when you can wait a year, you can remove a year of potential injury risk, because let's be honest, knock on wood, if Sengun or Jalen get injured this season, it's a serious injury, the Rockets are not going to give them maxes at the end of the season. Not going to happen. Because, as I said before, I'm a fan of the team, and the team's interests are above all else. It was pretty predictable that unless the Rockets got something, and I meant anything, and if you go back on the pods, you can see that all I said was, yeah, I would give him the max if we took the escalators off, so in case he makes an all-NBA team, he did become the super max. That's not even taking less money, it's just protecting the team from having a potential, Bradley Beal type deal where it became a super max, but the guy was, just an all-star, and being a super max to an all-star cripples your team flexibility going forward. That was all I said, and guess what? That's what eventually ended up happening. Now to talk about now that we've established that the best for the team is what matters from the frame of reference of this podcast, which I mean, I'm speaking for Ben here, but I'm pretty sure after however many decades he's been a Rockets fan that teams above the players, I'll add that I was not surprised when the interview that Sengun gave came out, and he seemed like he has always seemed like a pretty level-headed dude that has a better understanding of how this stuff works than most players do. Because he is smarter than most players, and he understands that he's it's his agent that deals with the negotiations, but he's informed, and he knows that he has zero leverage. Basically, every other up-and-coming prospect that's not a surefire all-star, but also would in a weaker year would have made it, which is the team has all the leverage. You're in year 3, you can extend it now. You can get, if you want guaranteed financial security, you can take less money. If you don't, the team has no downside other than potentially fracturing whatever relationship. But even then, within the relationship, you don't have that many leverage. It's a team with 6 other young prospects. You are the best of them, make no mistake about it. But you're not generational at this point.
At least not yet. And let me jump in real quick. So I think the context with the rest of the league is important. I think a lot of fans look at this very insular and forget that there is a broader context. And all around the league, look at Tyrese Maxey and the Sixers. If the team has a path to significant financial flexibility in a way that can help with their team building, because the goal is to not just have 1 or 2 really good players, but to build a championship team, they are incentivized to maximize their flexibility. And that's what waiting on Sengun would do. Now, you've seen some teams go and give these max extensions. As we mentioned, Orlando with Franz Wagner would be the closest comparable, because I shouldn't say that because Sengun has outplayed him, but he's a good but not generational player. I think the Pistons still hope Cade could be, but even the Pistons with Cade, even the Cavaliers with Mobley, those teams do not have a path to financial flexibility. Orlando went all in this offseason and made several veteran signings. Detroit brought in Tobias Harris, and they weren't as active as the Rockets were a year ago, but they spent a decent bit of their flexibility. The Cavaliers just gave a new deal to Donovan Mitchell. none of these teams are looking at the potential room the Rockets had last summer. And that's what really changed for me, Paolo. When we did that pod in early January, and I made the case for potentially maxing Sengun at a sub-escalator level, meaning the max without going to that higher threshold if he makes an All-NBA team. Look, I'm sympathetic to the Sengun fans because I do believe there is some intangible value to giving him that peace of mind early. I do believe that if you feel that confident that he is that level of a player, then you bolster that relationship. It's important because if the player leaves you in the dust, then we know, just like the end of the James Harden era, and how quickly it can all unravel. I don't think Alperen Sengun will take it as an insult that he's not viewed as that level of a player just yet. That's not saying he won't be. That's not saying he can't be, just based on what has happened thus far. And the other comparables in this draft class, it's an apples to oranges when you consider the fact that their team does not have the financial pathway to a ton of flexibility next summer that the Rockets do. The last figures I saw, the Rockets have the second most potential room in the league as currently constructed, about $30 million, trailing only the Brooklyn Nets. And they could easily get more than that if they needed, have a ton of trade-friendly contracts if they need to offload more to get to actual max space. And so because of that, I think Sengun is smart enough to know that the Houston situation, again, it's an apples to oranges to those other comparisons. The only way you could argue it makes sense for the Rockets to bypass all that flexibility is if you think Sengun is so established as not just a near all-star level player, which he was last year, but legitimately like the alpha of a contender, a legit Nikola Jokic type MVP or borderline MVP type player, not just all-star, all-NBA, maybe top 10. Not going to say he can't be that. I love the guy. I want him to get to that level, but I don't think he's going to take it as an insult if the Rockets say, we love you, but we still have some questions as to whether you are that guy. And if he's not that guy, then I'm sorry, the magnitude of the space is what tips the scales for me in the direction of waiting. Earlier this year, because it was so preliminary, we had this discussion in January, I didn't realize just how much room the Rockets had. When we're talking about a path to max cap room and what looks like a pretty strong free agency class, also, if you have that type of financial flexibility, it can help you with trades as well. That's not something you can easily pass up unless the player is so established that that relationship is just so important, and you can, just with that player, become a contender. Quite frankly, you don't have to use the space. If you believe in the player to that extent, I just don't think Alperen Sengun is quite at that level. Now, it might be a little bit of an awkward conversation if you extend Jalen Green and not Alperen Sengun, given that Jalen has underperformed relative to Alp to this point in their careers. Now, Jalen does have a larger cap hold, so the math isn't quite the same. But regardless, I don't think the Rockets are going to extend Jalen either. And as long as you don't do that, as long as the comparisons are other teams with potential routes to cap room, like what we just saw the Sixers do with Tyrese Maxey, I think LP is smart enough to understand. And to me, that interview just confirmed that he gets it, right?
Yeah, and since it's a champion, I'll say it. It's the people who don't know how the cap holds work. The higher the draft picks you are, the higher the cap hold is before you sign a deal in free agency. So if you hit restricted free agency, and the team has to, I'll call it, activate a cap hold, just so teams can't, circumvent the system and say, oh, we have bird rights on this guy, but before we sign him, let's get all the way up to the salary cap, and then we'll use him to go massively over the salary cap. The reason is higher picks are projected to be, better players. So it's basically like a fake contract in the books before you sign the actual contract. And since a top pick's projected to be better, their value for that ghost contract is higher than the lower picks. So for Jalen, he signed for something below the max. It's possible that the Rockets could actually save money by extending him this year if they extend him at a figure lower than what his cap hold would be. And his cap hold would be something like 30-something million, if I'm not mistaken, just off the top of my head. And so if they sign them for something below that, they could actually get cap space from doing so. Because if that cap hold...
They would, but I doubt Jalen would do it. Yeah, I agree. If it's lower than the cap hold, then yeah, I just doubt Jalen would do it.
For sure. So just to explain to people at home, I mean, I would guess that we've talked about this enough, but if you renounce that cap hold, then the player is no longer restricted and you no longer have bird rights on him, so you can't, renounce that ghost contract and then sign someone and then go and get the player back. That's something you can't do. So even then, it could make sense to extend Jalen if it were at what looks like would be absurd right now, would be a below $30 million contract. And even then, I'm not sure. I wouldn't extend Jalen, but it's not even just because of what it would look like to Sengun. I wouldn't extend Jalen because it's too big of a gamble for this early in the rebuild, considering how inconsistent he has been. And considering how many guys we may have to extend in the future, we may have to make tough decisions, but we don't want to lock ourselves to someone who I love Jalen the player, but hasn't been consistent enough to warrant it. Because even $30 million a year, even $28 million a year, which is clearly something that Jalen would not take, would still scare me because of how low the floor is for him, considering he's a scoring guard and those phase in and out of the league, so quickly, especially as prospects. So I would extend Jalen because I think the easier way to put it is I would not extend Jalen because of his play, and I would not extend Sengun because of his cap situation. If Sengun were the number 2 pick and Jalen the 16th, and the roles were reversed, I would extend Sengun this season. Because then the only downside would be a potential injury. But to me, at that point, it's worth that risk. Isn't worth potentially, angering or having Sengun be a little less happy than what he could be here. Right? At that point, it's not the reward doesn't match the risk, and I wouldn't do it. But it's to me, and it's been this way for a long time. It's a no-brainer to not do it, considering how small the cap hold is compared to what he's actually going to get paid.
All right, I've got one more rant that I want to get out. I'll try and do this quickly, and then we'll wrap up the pod. So my least favorite argument in favor of a Sengun extension, again, I'm sympathetic to what I'll call the vibes argument, because a lot of other 2021 picks are being given that benefit of the doubt by their teams. And so if you don't take the context of the cap positioning of those teams into account, I get the optics, I get how it looks. I know the NBA is a league where players have all the power. It's a player empowerment era for a reason. And so bolstering your relationship with a guy who could be your franchise player, especially if he's your favorite player, I understand that vibes can matter. And quite frankly, before I understood the potential magnitude of financial space for the Rockets, I argued the same myself when we did in early January a potential Sengun extension pod. So I am sympathetic to that argument. One argument that I am not at all sympathetic to, and yet I see it pop up all the time on social media, especially on Reddit and Clutch fans, is this idea that if the Rockets aren't going to have Sengun, they better have a plan locked in now. The immediate response is, well, who are the Rockets going to use that space on in 2025? With the implication being, if it doesn't pan out or if that plan is unsatisfactory, then it's a mistake. And you should just go ahead and cement your relationship with Sengun. And my response to that is there is significant value in the optionality. The Sixers did not know they were going to get Paul George. There's absolutely a world where the Clippers would have given Paul George a max deal. A lot of people expected them to. There's a world where Paul George might have caved and accepted a little bit of less money to stay in LA, where he was pretty clearly happy based on and off-court interest. There's a world where if Kawhi Leonard doesn't get hurt, then maybe the Clippers go on the run the Mavs did and get to the finals, and we're having an entirely different conversation. Maybe he just picks up his player option and buys another year where he is to get more clarity. There's a lot of other scenarios that could have played out with Paul George that lead to him staying in LA, or maybe the Clippers get nervous at the trade deadline, the season's going sideways, and so they trade him rather than risk him going into free agency. The Sixers did not know when they were making this decision with Tyrese Maxey 11 months ago that Paul George was going to be an option for them. They knew it was a possibility, but there were other plans as well. If they didn't get Paul George, they had other options for that financial space that would still make them a better team. And so when people ask, what is the plan? You don't have to have an ironclad plan. There's value in simply having the optionality, especially in today's NBA, where relationships can sour so quickly, and just be able to seize any opportunity that shows up on the market. I can't tell you exactly what things are going to look like 11 months from now. Shoot, Rockets fans should know that from their own experience in 2023. If I had said in July of 2022, at this point 2 years ago, that the Rockets were going to sign Fred VanVleet, I think a lot of people would have said, dude, you're being a homer. Because Fred was an all-star that year, and the Raptors had won nearly 50 games. They were the 5 seed in the East. What ended up happening was basically a perfect storm. The Raptors regressed a little bit. I think they were 41-41, a 9 or 10 seed in the East, but it wasn't a full-on rebuild to where, at least not at that time, to where they would have sold off Fred at the trade deadline. They were just close enough to keep him to see what might happen with the playoff push. I think Houston got much more desirable. In 2022, the pushback would have been, an all-star level player is not going to leave for a team that, the previous year had the worst record in the NBA and was coached by Stephen Silas, a guy who had almost zero pedigree around the NBA. Well, a year later, some of your young players took a step forward, including Alperen Sengun, and the Rockets hired Ime Udoka. By the way, I think Toronto's plan was probably to hire Ime themselves. The Rockets beat them to the punch. Kudos to Tillman Fertitta for getting that deal done. And now Ime Udoka transformed the outlook for the Rockets to where they were suddenly much more attractive for a guy like Fred VanVleet. And all of a sudden, he's available on the market, and perhaps an assist to Rafael Stone for his relationship with Rich Paul, willing to sign what's effectively a 2-year deal, 2 years plus a team option, so it's only 2 years on the books for the Rockets. Just a perfect storm scenario. And the Rockets, because they had all that cap space, were able to get him without surrendering a dime to the Toronto Raptors or any asset. If I had told you in July of 2022, when Fred VanVleet was coming off an all-star season, that the Rockets were going to get him not in a trade, just a straight-up signing for only 2 years. And at the time, again, Fred was an all-star for a Raptors team that was 5th in the East, had won nearly 50 games, was all in on winning. People would have said I was a homer, that I was crazy. And yet, that's what happened. The value for the Rockets, they didn't know it was going to be Fred. Maybe there's a world where it's James Harden. The point is, there's value in the optionality. That's what cap space provides in the modern NBA, and it might not be a signing, it might be a trade. That's how the Rockets are looking at this. There's not an ironclad plan. They don't know exactly what the market is going to look like, be it free agents or trades. Some guys are going to extend. They can't tell you exactly what things are going to look like 11 months from now. They just know that if they have that pathway to max or near max flexibility, it just makes it a lot easier for Rafael Stone to bring in quality players. It opens far more doors. That is the calculus here, and the Rockets do not have to give you an ironclad plan. They don't have to give you a name, because I think the goal here, because most of these people, let's be honest, they just want Sengun to get the money because he's their favorite player, and they want him to, there's a certain stature in the league where certain guys, when they get a max deal, especially in stan culture, then they're looked at as a max player. And of course, that can be a little bit misleading because more guys get max deals than deserve it, because obviously there are some guys that are worth way more than that, but LeBron James would be worth way above the max every single year. It's just, that's the economic system the NBA has in place. And so people that are player first fans love it when their guy is viewed as that stature. And so if they can agenda push with Sengun or whoever it may be as a max player a year early, they would love to do that and put that in their social media post and whatnot. In terms of team building, an NBA GM has to consider the broader context, and that's where this is beneficial. And I just think some of these conversations they're just not genuine. I think they ask you to provide a name and say, who are the Rockets going to get as a result of this? And then when you throw out a name, besides the fact that, again, the plan should be optionality, if I were to provide just one or two hypotheticals, then if the name was too good, the pushback would be, oh, you're dreaming, you're a homer, just like the Fred scenario from 2 years ago. Even though the Rockets are in a better place now as a team, okay, we're talking about a player that's hypothetically better than Fred. Otherwise, why would you decline Fred's option? So if I were to say like a superstar level player would potentially come available to the Rockets by free agent or trade, they'd say, oh, Rockets come out 41 and 41 year. Why is that player going to leave his current situation? Why would he want Houston over all else? They'd say that's not going to happen. And then if I was to point out a player that's, a nice player, but not as good as Sengun, let's call an upper tier role player, they'd say, oh, why are you making Sengun wait for the sake of this guy? Sengun's a potential all-star. And the answer, of course, is it's about the team. It's not about any one guy. I mean, the Celtics got to the next level after all those years of being good but not good enough. I think it was, the Drew Holiday trade obviously did a lot, but Kristaps Porzingis earlier last offseason. I don't think no one would say that Kristaps Porzingis was or is a star. He's an upper tier role player that they were able to get at the right time. Now, I'm not saying the Rockets now are where the Celtics were a year ago. No, what I'm saying is that even if, I wouldn't say Porzingis is as good as Sengun, or at least he doesn't have the upside. But at the same time, if it helps you build a championship team, that's the goal. And so it shouldn't be framed as, oh, you're making Alperen Sengun wait for a player of a lower stature. No, you're making Alperen Sengun wait. And again, when we say wait, all we're saying is wait on the moment he can put pen to paper in terms of when the actual paychecks start rolling in on the max contract. It's the same whether you give him the max deal this offseason or next. Does not change at all. That's a very important thing to underscore that I don't think every fan grasps. We're not talking about making him wait another year on the actual money. But it shouldn't be framed, to get back to the point as we try and wrap up, it's not just about, oh, Sengun is this class of player of this stature, and what if they end up making him wait for a player who isn't of his stature? That's not the point. The point is to maximize your odds of building a championship team. And there are more options available by waiting until 2025 for the reasons that we have laid out. Now, doesn't guarantee they're going to work out, and I can't tell you exactly who that's going to be, but I can tell you that optionality is the play. The Rockets are not the first team to do it. They're not the last. And so the Rockets don't owe you an answer, and they don't have to give you an answer in order for this to be a good plan. Look at the Sixers and Paul George. Look at the Rockets and Fred VanVleet. You do not have to know these things in 11 months. Just be patient, trust the process, trust the math, trust Rafael Stone, who I think at this point has shown you that he knows what he's doing, and give them the benefit of the doubt. And above all else, again, I am sympathetic to the Sengun Fives arguments, but listen to that interview with an open mind, without any preconceived notions going in. He seems very knowledgeable, very composed. I did not detect any hints of a guy who's ready to go scorched earth or do something to put himself above the team. That's not who Alperen Sengun is. Quite frankly, Alperen Sengun is about winning from everything I know about him. And this plan gives the Rockets more avenues to put a potential championship team around him. So even if there are some nerves, sure, of course, we would all love to get more guaranteed money sooner. It helps you sleep better at night. There's more peace of mind. All of that is true. At the same time, there's another side as well. And the student of the game that Alperen Sengun is, the competitor, it sounds like he understands that as well. And so because of that, I think the odds are heavily on the side of this thing being pushed until 2025, especially when you see the max deals being given out to other players in his draft class, which makes any scenario where Sengun takes a slight discount for the sake of getting that financial security of year early. It was always a little bit remote. Now it's really remote. I think it's a matter of when, not if, that Sengun gets that extension. And for the Rockets, it just makes sense to wait until 2025. All right, last little fun thing I want to get to before we close out the pod. I know we've gone on over an hour today, but come on, it's the offseason. We're going a little bit bigger picture, deeper dives here. So Jabari Smith Jr., we saw him in the background of the Alex Bregman walk-off against the Dodgers on Saturday night. He was having a blast, stayed all 9 innings, and seemed fairly engaged throughout the game. Quite frankly, I thought he looked annoyed at various points. The guy next to him was trying to take a few selfies from time to time. I did some checking with the Rockets. He asked them for tickets a few days before. Of course, they want to oblige him, and that's what ended up happening. And he was there for the big moment. You can see him celebrating in the background. And look, I think it's just fun to see Houston athletes supporting other teams in this city. We've talked about that before. This is mostly just about, celebrating the fact that he seems to be all in on being a Houstonian and supporting the Houston sports scene and the culture and the vibes, and all of that is good. With all that said, I will note that it's not just, an occasional Astros game. He is at Toyota Center as much as any player on the roster. And that's not judging anyone else. Look, Alperen Sengun goes to Turkey for extended stretches every offseason. That's his home. That's where he grew up. As long as he's doing his work there and staying in shape, I get it. Jalen Green's from California, and now he's got at least one kid. He's not in Houston all the time. So I understand it, not judging them. Again, as long as they're staying in shape, as long as they're ready to go when training camp opens in September, that's fine. That's all you need. But the fact that Jabari is so invested in Houston, even during the offseason, and I've heard that it's different than almost any player on the roster, he is always there. A little anecdote I'll share for the listeners that have stuck with us through over an hour of this pod. So in May, the Rockets had a bring your dog to work day at Toyota Center for the staff. If you don't make the playoffs, May is a pretty low-key month because the draft isn't here yet. The next schedule isn't out. So Rockets, just for fun, had a day where staffers could bring their well-behaved dogs to the office just to sort of have some fun. Jabari happened to be in the gym working out, and he came down and he took pictures of staffers or with staffers and their dogs. That's just the kind of guy he is. It wasn't planned. It wasn't like, oh, bring your dog to Toyota Center and he can hang out with Jabari Smith. No, he just happened to be there. It's like, well, hey, that would be cool. So next thing you know, you're seeing all these photos on Instagram of Sheppard with random dogs that were, take your dog to work day, part of that promotion for the Rockets and their staffers, trying to give them a little perk after a long season. And it just speaks to the fact that he's always there. That's a part of it. And again, he's not from another country. He doesn't have a family. Well, he has a family, but he doesn't have like a super tight family situation somewhere other than Houston that requires him to leave on a frequent basis. So he seems to be all over Houston these days. And at the end of the day, does that mean anything for his development as a basketball player? Not really. Again, as long as these other guys are doing the work when they're outside of Houston, doesn't matter. With that said, we've talked throughout this pod about the hard decisions when they're coming up for the Rockets financially and keeping this team together over the long haul. And I do wonder, while mostly joking about this, just enjoying the fact that Jabari seems to be Team Houston, at the same time, the fact that he seems to be so invested in not just, certainly his teammates and the Rockets as an organization, but the city as well, everything that comes with being a professional athlete in Houston, does that not make you at least a little more positive about him sticking around long term? Not so much that other guys aren't, but just that the guy who's invested with the organization and the city on so many levels, to me, that's just the kind of guy that might do a little bit extra to make it work when things get tight. And when I say make it work, I mean financially, to find a way to stay. We're nowhere near that point yet. Again, that is years down the road, but Jabari being Captain Houston at the moment, again, mostly fun, but just sort of in the back of my mind, does that not make you at least a little optimistic that maybe down the road he's the kind of guy that does something, just a little bit extra to try and find a way to stay and make this work?
Yeah, I don't. So I think it's really cool that he's always around. I think it's really cool that he goes to the games and he's actually watching the games. We've seen plenty of players go, be on their phones the entire time and not even, really pay attention. Sometimes you even wonder if it's like, oh, it's just like, I can get tickets at school, so let me go and do it. Or if it's just to show off or whatever it is. I think it's really cool that he actually was caring about the game, right? But I think long term, it depends, right? Depends if you project him to be a max player or not. Because if he's a max player, I don't see him ever taking less than a max. Now, if we're talking about, him being I don't know, I'm trying to think of an example. Well, probably not going to find someone with the same skill set, but if he were like how is nobody popping? Like, if he's like a near max player, but not quite the max, but like maybe a Gareth Allen type, and maybe it makes a difference maybe it makes a big difference to the team, or they can only offer him so much. Maybe it eventually plays a role, but I really don't think so. But I like that he's so Houston centered because of the type of player that I think he's going to eventually become. I think he and Tyrese are both going to be similar types of guys where they're going to fit into any team that Rockets may put together at any point.
Or buzzkill. Come on.
I don't think he's going to take a pay cut eventually. Maybe he does towards the end of his career. To me, what's more exciting to me, because I'm a sucker for narratives, is that he has the perfect profile to fit into different iterations of the same team, which makes him more likely to stick around the same franchise for a really long time. And I love those types of stories where a guy was drafted to a team and he stays there the entire time, and by the end of his career, he's synonymous with that team. And I think with Tyrese, we have a guy that can be like that. And I think Jabari is someone who, first of all, is really self-aware, and he demands a lot of himself.
Absolutely.
And the fact that he's so self-aware.
The question he asked to Jason Tatum about underachieving his first 2 years. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And I think because of that, he's not going to be, there's a couple of examples of guys over the past few years. I think Miles Turner is one of them. Like, Miles Turner is the perfect center role player.
Yeah.
And 2 or 3 years ago, there were interviews. He gave an interview where he said he felt like he could be more than what he is, and he wanted, to go to a team that would give him more offensive reps and stuff like that. And I'm like, dude, you're excellent the way you are. If you try to be too much, and there's multiple examples of players throughout time that wanted to be more than what they had the skill to be. And I'm not saying Jabari doesn't have the skill to be whatever he wants to be. I'm just saying part of the deal with Jabari is that at the very worst case scenario, he's going to be a really, really useful high-end role player. And because of that, the fact that he likes being around Houston so much gives me more hope that he can become one of those guys that is synonymous with the team and with the franchise when it's all said and done. And, he might be one of those guys. Listen, NBA careers can go 10 or 15 years pretty comfortably nowadays. In 10, 15 years, teams go through more than, with rare exceptions, teams goes through more than one iteration and different types of stars. And Jabari can be, and Tyrese is as well, the guy that will fit into any iteration that there may be. And so he may be one of those guys that carries the culture of the team from one iteration to the other, similar to, everybody talks about the Miami Heat culture and everything like that. There's usually players that are, as I said, I think there's no better way to put it than synonymous with the franchise and its values. And I think Jabari has the potential to be that, and the sucker for narratives in me, kind of more than taking a pay cut down the line, to me, the payoff to his story being such a Houston bound guy, I would actually give more value to if he stayed for his entire career here than if he took a pay cut at any point. And sometimes those things come together, right? Sometimes the fact that they stay,
especially late on careers. Yeah.
Eventually, sometimes stuff like that happens, but I think it's too early to think about that. And right now I'm just hoping that he's one of those guys that stays really long term, because I think everybody knows I have a thing for good 3-point shooters that can defend multiple positions. Call me, you can clearly tell that I, started getting into basketball in the Daryl Morey era, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
When you first mentioned it, that was kind of the path I took it to when I was, daydreaming about what this could possibly mean if we overreacted to it.
Oh, okay. No, I just thought it was really cool to watch. And, of course, we could all dream about guys taking pay cuts to keep this core together long term as they go into their actual NBA primes. Because when you saw him and he was in Tillman's seats right behind home plate, he was actually watching the game. He wasn't on his phone. And there were times he was with a couple of people, including, I think, his significant other. And so they would go back, I guess, to get a drink, to go to the bathroom, whatever it may be. Jabari stayed. There were times he was there by himself, and he was just there chilling and watching the game. Like, it wasn't like he was just there for the gram or for attention. No, he was just having a good time. And when Bregman walked it off, when you look at the photos, the video, when Bregman's going into home plate and the team is celebrating and going crazy, look a little bit behind home plate, and you'll see Jabari right there. He's hard to miss because when there's a 6'10" guy in row one behind home plate. He's easy to identify if you know where to look, especially. So I just got a kick out of it. And again, he just seems to, not that other guys aren't happy to be in Houston, but he seems really freaking happy to be in Houston, especially after a little bit of a rocky start to his career. I would love it if he ends up paying up big, whether to the star level or a high-end role player level. Yeah. I think he's got a bright career in the NBA.
Yeah, and for context, it's not like this was like one of those like really close, hard-fought games. Like for a bit there, it was 5-0.
They were down 5-0 2/3 of the way through the game. Yeah.
So it was not like it was a really easy game to tune out of.
For context, I'm not going to name names, but I've seen plenty of NBA players make an appearance and leave about the fifth or sixth inning, especially if the game isn't good. And what's funny, I asked someone who would know afterwards about, Jabari getting those tickets, and this person's first response to me was, did he stay? Meaning for the full 9 innings. And I was happy to report that, yeah, he did. He stayed. He showed his support. That's just the kind of guy he is. I just think it's a really cool story. I know his relationships with Rockets fans got off on the wrong foot a little bit because so many fans, including you, wanted Paolo Banchero before the 2022 draft. But I think his career arc now, the player he's turning into, is he going to be Paolo? I don't know. Time will tell. But I think he's on the right path to being a very good player. And one last note on that I want to throw in quickly, and Paolo, you might have some perspective on this as well. Zach Lowe had a pod recently where he talked about potential Lauri Markkanen trade destinations. Most of the rumors this offseason have surrounded Golden State, to a lesser extent San Antonio. The idea being, look, Markkanen's 27 years old. He's going into the last year of his contract. The Jazz are not close to contending. They're a couple of years behind the Rockets as currently constructed, and it's hard to get veteran win-now pieces to a market like Utah. So by the time, the Jazz are certainly well-positioned to bottom out in the next 2 draft classes, maybe they get Cooper Flag, but by the time that, even if the best case plays out for Utah in the draft and they let those guys develop, by the time they're actually ready to contend, Markkanen's going to be, 30, 31, 32 years old, perhaps starting to go on the downhill side a little bit of his prime. So maybe it makes the most sense to trade Markkanen now, also help your tanking odds even more, and, go all in on a rebuild that maximizes young players that will be in the same timeline as what they hope is, Cooper Flag, one of the boozers, and so on and so forth. So that's the case for the Jazz to consider trading Markkanen this offseason. Again, if they wait to the trade deadline, his value probably goes down a little bit since he's almost to free agency at that point. And Lowe mentioned in the pod that beyond the Warriors and the Spurs, he's heard the Rockets mention, and I'll emphasize the context, not saying he's heard the Rockets as an interested suitor, just mentioned by people around the league because the Rockets have so many young players. And as we've mentioned a few times in this pod, in theory, there's a need for a consolidation trade. And so I understand that. Markkanen's 27. It's not like the Rockets are quite ready to win a title, even if they acquired a player like that. Markkanen was an all-star in 2023. And so you look at it and superficially, look, the Rockets do want to win more games. Markkanen would be an upgrade. He's a power forward. Would be an upgrade on Jabari Smith Jr., let's just be honest. And so I can understand superficially how people could sort of connect the dots, if you will, and say, the Rockets might have the type of young players / pick assets that could fit better with Utah than Markkanen, and he would help the Rockets win more games next season. He would. I don't know that Markkanen would help them win a championship by the time Houston's window would actually open, which is going to be 2-3 years from now, regardless of whether they trade for Markkanen or not. And so because of that, I really don't see the Rockets being interested. I understand why people around the league would speculate, and especially because the Rockets were interested in a 27-year-old Donovan Mitchell earlier this offseason. I could see people saying, they wanted Donovan Mitchell. Why wouldn't they be interested in Lauri Markkanen? To me, there's a clear difference. If the Rockets were to trade for Donovan Mitchell, it would be to upgrade Jalen Green. And let's just be honest, Donovan Mitchell at this point is a better basketball player than Jalen Green in basically every facet of the game. That's not to say that Jalen can't, as the years progress, get to Donovan's level in some areas. I hope he does. But right now, that's just the honest truth. That's no shot at Jalen Green. That's just the truth. In terms of Lauri Markkanen, who is predominantly a power forward, the guys he would be taking minutes from would be some combination of Jabari Smith Jr., Tari Eason, and Amen Thompson. There's no way that all 3 of those guys are on the roster to bring in Lauri Markkanen. There's just no way to make the minutes work. Well, unless somehow you decided to play without a center and you traded Sengun. So why don't we throw Sengun in there for shits and giggles? Those 3 that I mentioned first, Thompson, Tari Eason, Jabari Smith Jr., they are already at 20, 21 years old, better defensively, in my opinion, and more versatile than Lauri Markkanen. I don't know if Sengun is, but then Sengun's already a better playmaker, in my opinion. So the point is, all of those guys have things already, even at just 20, 21, 22 years old, that they do better than Lauri Markkanen. And that's before we consider the timetable of the Rockets, when they can contend, how each player is likely to age over the next 3 years as the Rockets get closer to that contending window. Because we're not just talking about Lauri Markkanen compared to the Rockets now. We're talking about, a 30-year-old Lauri Markkanen versus, say, a 24-year-old Jabari Smith Jr. or a 25-year-old Tari Eason or a 23 or 24-year-old Amen Thompson, and so on and so forth. When you look at it through that lens and you consider that while Markkanen's still a better player today, there are things that those guys already are doing better than Markkanen, then unlike Donovan Mitchell, where I can see the case because it's a clear upgrade, you do want to win games, and if you win more games, you're in a more competitive environment that helps all your prospects develop. I understand that argument. However, for a guy like Markkanen, who would make you a little better now, but certainly wouldn't make you a contender, and giving up at least one guy that is already better than him in some areas of the game and is much younger with more upside, I just have a tough time seeing it. Again, it's not impossible if the cost is low enough. The Rockets will always be opportunistic. I'm sure they'll listen. I'm sure they'll take the phone call. I just have a tough time seeing the value and alignment to where the deal makes sense for both the Rockets and the Jazz, because I'm sure the Jazz could get a lot more from a team like, certainly the Warriors, who are desperate, or maybe the Spurs, who are in a similar situation. Well, they're in a lower position to rebuild than the Rockets, but they're not at a contending level. However, the Spurs have a more clear path to minutes at the power forward position where he could fit in alongside Wemby in a front court. I just don't see the upgrade of Markkanen relative to, some combination of current Rockets front court players, most notably Jabari, Tari, Amen, and Alperen Sengun, to where it would be worth it. I understand people around the league connecting the dots. I just don't see it actually getting to the finish line. That's my take, Paolo. Anything I'm missing there?
No, I think your last point was the most important one, and it's the one that will should apply to any star trade, which is the Rockets aren't the only team in the league that's going to be looking straight for whatever star you're talking about. So you've got to balance out who has the largest incentive, because that's the team that's going to be willing to give up the most, and then you can filter out among teams with the same level of incentive. You can go through and look at other parameters as well. The truth is, the Rockets are not hard-pressed to make a move right now. The Rockets are more than fine just staying the course and seeing what they have, at least one more year with all of the guys that they have, because they had 1 year of real basketball last year, and or that was obviously Timur Salas, so for the most part, it's not the best quality of a sample. And so I think the Spurs with Wemby, even the Spurs with Wemby, have kind of more pressure on them to compete sooner than the Rockets are already competing, right? But to move off from the tanking stage.
Agree. Yeah, and have more pressure. And after going 41-41, the Rockets don't have to be super aggressive. Like, they have some built-in trust equity with the players, with the fan base, and so on and so forth. The Spurs with Wemby have to do something in the next year or two, and they have a clearer pathway for minutes. And so you combine those two, and there's a much more compelling case for the Spurs to go all in on a guy like that than the Rockets.
Yeah, 100%. And so both the Warriors, obviously, with Steph Curry and the comment he had recently about, not necessarily, if the team's not good enough, he's not sure he's going to stay there. So the Spurs, the Warriors are obviously pressed as well. And then, as you said, positionally, Jabari and Tari are very good. They are very plug and play into any type of team. So of all positions to look for an upgrade, that would be the one that would probably make the least sense, because, well, if these guys are going to fit onto any team, you might as well try different things with the other positions, because these guys are like pretty set in stone as far as the next few years of Rockets basketball go. Although I do love Lauri, I like him. I think he's now had 2 years of all-star level play. It's just, if you could get the Lauri level of player at a different position, I would consider it, but at power forward, this doesn't make so much sense. And
agree.
Just say people should also just always have it present to things. First of all, the Rockets have a lot of assets, so mentioning the Rockets are interested in any player at any time is going to be in the best interest of the team trying to sell the player. So if obviously, if the Jazz are trying to maximize return, saying that the Rockets are interested will always make sense.
It only helps
Rockets. Yep. Yeah, because Rockets have a lot of assets that they can give up, and it's plausible that they would make a win now move. So it would always help. And then I think something we've learned the past year is the Rockets are very tight-lipped at this point. Nobody had any idea what the Rockets were going to do going into the draft. I think there's been a little bit of a shift in approach from the communication with the outside as far as Rockets go. And so
Right.
I think you usually hear, oh, people around the league think that the Rockets may do this. It's not like, oh, the Rockets are interested in doing this. So it's when the more middlemen people put and the more conditions they put on their statements before saying something tied to the Rockets, the less they know. And we it's usually, oh, an executive thinks that the Rockets may whatever.
Right.
It's like it's someone else that thinks that Rockets maybe will do something. So it's not really a report. It's basically a bunch of nothing. So yeah, I think we'll get it. I think people should get used to that happening time and time again, and it will continue to happen until the Rockets eventually make a win-now move.
Agree. And I think that's a cautionary tale for everyone over the next, really, however long this major transaction window, let's call it that. It's open now. It's definitely going to be open through 2025, looks like, the financial flexibility. As long as it stays open, the Rockets are going to be mentioned a lot because they have a great depth of young players and draft assets, as good of a young stockpile of any team in the league, in my opinion, when you combine the two. And so, yeah, it makes sense for other teams to leak the Rockets. It makes sense for people around the league to speculate. And the cautionary tale, again, listen to the wording. If you actually pay attention to what Zach Lowe said, and not just these aggravated clickbait headlines that can go viral or semi-viral, it's pretty clear that he is not reporting that the Rockets are interested in Lauri Markkanen. It's people around the league, agents, executives with other teams, whoever it may be. They're speculating that they could see potentially the Rockets being a fit. Listen to these guys. The top-of-the-line insiders, if they have legit intel, they want the credit. They will say, we've heard the Rockets are interested in so-and-so, or so-and-so is interested in the Rockets. They will tell you that. They would love to have that credit. If they don't say it that explicitly, it's because they don't have it to that level. It's something that's being discussed, and there could be something to it, sure. Not going to act like it's irrelevant, but there's also plenty of times that it's just, idle talk around, a couple of agents having a beer out in Las Vegas during Summer League, and there may not be anything more to it than that. And so it's not a shot at the reporters at all. Zach Lowe's as good as it gets. Just a reminder to pay attention to the actual wording and not the aggregated clickbait headlines and brief stories that you might see on your feed. All right. Anyway, we've gone on long enough, over an hour and a half. Apologies for going long, but we may have a little bit of a break before our next show. Paolo's about to go on vacation. I just got back myself, so I certainly cannot judge him. But yeah, I wanted to hit a few topics on this second to last day of July before we check out. We'll probably be back around the 10th or so of August, shortly after the NBA releases its schedule, which I don't know will be on the 10th, but typically that's around the date that it usually is. So, of course, we'll have a schedule reaction show sometime in the second week of August or so. That'll probably be our next episode, unless there's some form of breaking news between now and then. If there is, of course, I'll jump in and do a short solo episode. Not anticipating anything major, but you never know. Maybe there's a trade that breaks. August 6th is an inflection point with Lauri Markkanen, because I believe that's when he's eligible for an extension in Utah, which would take him off the market for 6 months. They also have incentive to, if they're going to give him an extension, I think they actually have to give it to him that first day in order for him to be trade eligible by the deadline this year. And then conversely, if they'll give him an extension, then it makes it pretty clear that he's probably not a long-term fit in Utah. So one way or another, it's a big inflection point. Doubt the Rockets are interested, but it's something to watch for. Also, Rockets do have several guys in the Olympics. Mentioned Dylan Brooks, Jock Landale, Jack McVay, things to watch for. If anything major happens, if there's a trade, anything that's unforeseen, then of course we'll jump in. But more than likely, we'll be back second or so week of August talking about the NBA schedule release and any takeaways from that are important to the Rockets and the fan community as we get ready for what should be a very fun 2024 to 25 season. Anyway, until then, we'll wrap it for today. And if you want more content before that next show, the best place to get it is online, where you can follow me on Twitter or X at Ben Dubose, Paolo at Paolo Alves NBA, and the show at The Logger Line, where if you go to that page, you can find our link tree. It's got links to our distribution partners, Apple, Google, Spotify. If you'd be kind enough to subscribe, leave a positive review at your location of choice. Of course, we'd greatly appreciate that. And also on that same link tree, you can get links to our friends, partners, sponsors of the program, USA Today's Rockets Wire, Carbach Brewing, Sports Talk 790. Hit up those links and you can enjoy their content as well. All right, with those plugs complete, we will adjourn for today. Paolo, enjoy your vacation. For Paolo, I'm Ben. Thanks as always for listening, to all of you that is, and please come back soon for another new episode of The Logger Line.